The history of human comfort is in many ways a history of the pursuit of coolness. Long before the steady mechanical hum of the compressor and the chemical hiss of the refrigerator defined our domestic landscape, people engaged in a constant, ingenious battle against heat. The cooling of liquids, a simple act we now take for granted, was once a profound challenge that spurred remarkable innovation across centuries and continents. This is the story of that quest, a chronicle of how our ancestors harnessed the fundamental principles of physics and the bounty of the natural world to chill their water, wine, and ale. Part 1: The Earth's Own Coolness. The earliest and most fundamental method of cooling was to borrow the stable, low temperature of the Earth itself. From the earliest agrarian settlements to the grand estates of the Roman Empire, people understood that the ground below offered a respite from the sun above. The most common implementation of this was the cellar or the storage pit. A deep hole was dug, often down to the water table, and lined with stone or brick. This subterranean chamber maintained a remarkably constant temperature, significantly cooler than the surface air in summer. Here, amphorae of wine, jugs of milk, and casks of beer could be stored, their contents protected from spoilage and gently cooled by the surrounding earth. The effectiveness of this method depended on depth and insulation. A well-constructed cellar with thick walls and a proper door could function as a reliable, year-round cooler. A more advanced and specialized structure was the yakshul, or ice pit, which emerged in ancient Persia over 2 millennia ago. These were not simple holes in the ground, but sophisticated domed buildings, often made with a special mortar called saruj, composed of sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash in specific proportions, which was resistant to heat transfer. The structures featured subterranean storage spaces, often deep enough to reach groundwater, and were equipped with windcatchers badgers that funneled cool air down into the storage chamber while allowing the warmer air to rise and escape. During the winter, ice and snow were brought from the nearby mountains or collected from frozen ponds and stored inside, packed in insulating layers of straw. Remarkably, these chambers could preserve ice well through the scorching summer months, allowing the wealthy to have chilled beverages and even create frozen desserts. In Europe, the icehouse became a common feature on large estates from the 16th century onward. Typically, they were brick-lined pits, built into a hillside for added insulation and topped with a thatched or turf roof. Like the yakshul, they were stocked with ice cut from frozen lakes and rivers during the winter. The ice blocks were carefully stacked and insulated with straw or sawdust. This stored ice was then used throughout the year to cool wine cellars, make chilled drinks, and preserve food. The management of an ice house was a skilled task, as proper packing and drainage were crucial to prevent the ice from melting too quickly. Part 2: The Magic of Evaporation. Perhaps the most elegant and widespread cooling technology before electricity relied on the simple principle of evaporation. When a liquid turns into a gas, it requires energy drawing heat from its immediate surroundings. This phenomenon was observed and harnessed in a multitude of ways. The most iconic of these devices is the botillo of Spain. This porous clay jug, with its characteristic spherical body and multiple spouts, is a masterpiece of passive cooling. Filled with water, the liquid slowly seeps through the unglazed clay to the outer surface. There it evaporates into the air, drawing heat from the water remaining inside. On a hot, dry day, a botillo can cool its contents by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius below the ambient temperature. Similar vessels were used across the ancient world, from the Egyptian zir to the Italian carafa di porcelana. This principle was scaled up in the form of the zir pot, or pot-in-pot refrigerator. This device, still used in arid regions today, consists of a larger pot placed inside a smaller one with a layer of wet sand filling the space between them. The outer pot is made of porous clay, and as the water in the sand evaporates, it cools the inner chamber, which can be used to store perishables like vegetables, dairy, and of course, drinking water. A damp cloth draped over the entire unit enhances the evaporative effect. In India, another clever evaporative cooler was developed, the punkah. While primarily a fan for moving air, its use had a direct impact on cooling liquids. A servant known as a punkawala would pull a rope attached to a large, swinging cloth panel suspended from the ceiling, creating a breeze for the room's occupants. This moving air significantly accelerated the evaporation of sweat from the skin, providing a cooling sensation. Similarly, a breeze across the surface of a liquid in an open, porous vessel would dramatically increase the rate of evaporation and thus the cooling effect. Jugs of water and wine were often placed in the path of the punkah's airflow to enhance their chill. Wind-driven evaporation was also harnessed architecturally. The badgers of Persia, mentioned earlier for their use in ice houses, were also employed to cool buildings and the liquids within them. By capturing even the slightest breeze from high above the ground and channeling it down over interior pools of water or moist clay surfaces, These ancient air conditioning systems could lower the temperature of entire rooms, creating an environment where stored drinks would remain naturally cool. Part 3: The Age of Ice. The next great leap came with the commercialization and global trade of ice. This was no longer just about local storage, but about moving cold across vast distances. The beginnings of this trade are ancient, with records of Roman emperors sending runners to the mountains to fetch snow for their wine. However, it became an industry in the early 19th century, thanks in large part to a New England entrepreneur named Frederick Tudor. Tudor, later nicknamed the Ice King, had a visionary idea: to harvest ice from the frozen lakes of New England and ship it to the sweltering ports of the Caribbean and eventually around the world. He faced immense skepticism and initial financial ruin. The challenges were monumental: how to prevent the ice from melting during long sea voyages in tropical climates. Through tireless experimentation, Tudor and his team developed effective solutions. They used sawdust, a cheap byproduct of New England's lumber mills, as a highly effective insulator. They built massive, insulated ice houses in ports like Havana and Calcutta to receive and store the cargo. The arrival of the first ship from Boston in Calcutta in 1833 was a sensation. The local population was astounded by this crystal-clear substance that had traveled from the other side of the world. The ice trade revolutionized the way people cooled their drinks. It was no longer a privilege reserved for those with a cellar or an ice house on their estate. Ice could be sold by the pound, delivered to homes and businesses, and dropped into glasses. It created the social ritual of the ice drink and gave rise to new beverages designed around it, like cocktails. To serve this new market, a new household object was born: the icebox. These were wooden or metal cabinets lined with zinc or tin and insulated with materials like cork, sawdust, seaweed, or straw. A large block of ice delivered regularly by the iceman was placed in a compartment at the top. Cold air, being denser, would sink down into the main food and drink storage area below. A drip pan at the bottom collected the meltwater, which had to be emptied daily. The icebox was the direct mechanical predecessor of the modern refrigerator, its form and function dictated by the block of natural ice that powered it. Part 4: Scientific Ingenuity and Chemical Cold. As the scientific revolution progressed, a deeper understanding of thermodynamics and chemistry opened up new possibilities for artificial cooling. People began to explore ways to create cold without relying on harvested winter ice. One of the earliest scientific methods was the use of soluble salts. It was discovered that certain salts, like potassium nitrate or ammonium nitrate, when dissolved in water, cause an endothermic reaction. They absorb heat from their surroundings. This principle was used to create simple cooling baths. A bottle of wine could be placed in a bucket of water, and salt would be added, rapidly lowering the temperature of the water and thus chilling the bottle. This method was known in some cultures for centuries and provided a quick, if somewhat expensive, way to cool a small amount of liquid without any pre-stored ice. This principle was refined with the invention of the sarbat cooler, a device used in the Middle East and South Asia. It consisted of two metal containers, one inside the other. The inner container held the sweet, fruity drink called sarbat. The space between the two containers was filled with a mixture of water and saltpeter potassium nitrate. As the saltpeter dissolved, it would actively draw heat from the inner vessel, chilling the beverage within. The most significant breakthrough in chemical cooling came with the development of vapor compression refrigeration. While the first practical home refrigerators were electrical, the foundational experiments were done with other power sources. In the 1850s, an Australian named James Harrison built an ether mechanical ice-making machine. In the United States, Dr. John Gorrie, seeking a way to cool the rooms of yellow fever patients, developed a machine that used compressed air to create ice. These early prototypes, often powered by steam engines or gas flames, were the direct ancestors of the modern appliance. They proved that humanity could now manufacture cold on demand, breaking its final tether to the seasons. From the cool, damp earth of a Stone Age pit to the humming gas-powered refrigerators of the early 20th century, the human journey to cool liquids is a testament to our relentless ingenuity. It is a story of observing nature's subtle cues: the chill of evaporation, the constant temperature of the deep earth, and of applying growing scientific knowledge to manipulate the physical world. Each step, from the porous clay of the Bottijo to the global voyages of the ice trade, made the simple, profound pleasure of a cool drink more accessible, paving the way for the world of instant, ubiquitous cold we know today. It was a slow revolution, built brick by brick, pot by pot, and ice block by ice block, driven by a universal and timeless desire for refreshment. However, did not progress in a simple, linear fashion. It was a tapestry woven with threads of isolated discovery, cultural exchange, and parallel innovation. While the Persians perfected their yakshal on the other side of the world, in the arid American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans were employing their own remarkably effective evaporative cooling techniques. They constructed their dwellings, often carved into canyon walls, with thick adobe walls that provided immense thermal mass, slowing the penetration of daytime heat. Within these structures, they used porous clay alas, large storage jars for keeping water. They would place these alas in the draftiest parts of their homes or even in specially designed wall niches where outside air could flow over the damp surface, continuously wicking away heat. This was not a centralized technology like an ice house, but a democratized one, integrated into the very fabric of daily life and architecture. In the humid tropics, where evaporative cooling was less effective and ice was an impossible fantasy, different strategies emerged. Across Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, people became masters of using shade and convection. Springs, often emerging from the base of hills or mountains, were naturally cooler than the surface air. These were carefully protected and often channeled through hollowed bamboo pipes to village centers, ensuring the water arrived with as little thermal gain as possible. For other liquids, like fermented coconut wine or rice beverages, they used the principle of the cooling grove. Pots were suspended in the deep, perpetual shade of the jungle canopy, where the dense foliage blocked the sun's rays and the high transpiration from the leaves created a locally cooler microclimate. Sometimes they were placed over slow, smoldering fires not for heat, but for smoke, which acted as a preservative, while the gentle air currents rising from the fire would aid in slight evaporative cooling of the pot's exterior. The European Middle Ages, often mischaracterized as a period of technological stagnation, saw important refinements in cooling technology, particularly within the context of monastic life. Monastic communities, with their need to preserve food and brew beer for large, stable populations, became centers of practical engineering. Their cellars evolved into complex, multi-level structures, often built into hillsides with sophisticated ventilation shafts that utilize the stack effect, where hot air rises and draws in cooler air from below to maintain a constant circulation of cool, dry air. The Cistercian order, in particular, was renowned for the advanced hydraulic engineering of their monasteries, often using diverted streams to run through channels in their cellar floors, actively washing the space with cold water to enhance the cooling effect for their beer and wine stores. This was a move from passive terrestrial cooling to active hydrocooling. The Renaissance and the ensuing scientific revolution brought a new dimension: the quantification of cold. Inventors and natural philosophers began to systematically experiment with thermometers and the effects of various salts and chemical reactions. In the 16th century, the Italian physician and mathematician Giambattista della Porta described, in his book Magia Naturalis, Natural Magic, a method for cooling wine that was a direct precursor to the ice cream maker. He described placing a bottle of wine in a mixture of snow and saltpeter, noting that the saltpeter caused the snow to melt and in doing so produced a cold far more intense than the snow alone. This was a crucial observation of the phenomenon of freezing point depression, where adding a salt to ice lowers its melting point, allowing it to absorb more heat from its surroundings. This principle would become the bedrock of artificial ice making. The 18th century saw the proliferation of the winery grotto, or ice well, among the European aristocracy. These were often elaborate garden follies, beautiful stone structures built over natural springs or artesian wells. The combination of the cold spring water and the thick stone construction created an environment where temperature could be precisely managed. It was here that the connoisseurship of chilled beverages truly blossomed. The precise temperature for serving different wines, champagnes, and cordials became a point of etiquette and refinement. The desire for coolness was no longer just about refreshment or preservation. It was about enhancing flavor and creating a sensory experience, a social performance of wealth and sophistication. This period also saw the birth of the cooling stone or marble cooler. Wealthy households would have slabs of marble or soapstone that were stored in these cold cellars or grottos. When a bottle was to be served, it would be placed on the chilled stone slab or nestled into a specially carved depression in it. The high thermal mass of the stone would draw heat from the bottle, providing a rapid and elegant chill without diluting the beverage with melted ice water, a practice considered vulgar for fine wines. The 19th century, the great age of industry and empire, was the true crucible of modern cooling. The ice trade, pioneered by Frederick Tudor, globalized cold, but it also exposed its fragility. Ice was a commodity subject to the whims of weather, logistics, and economics. A warm winter in New England could cause shortages and price spikes. The search for a reliable, man-made alternative became urgent. This led to a flurry of invention, a period of intense competition and parallel discovery in the field of mechanical refrigeration. The fundamental principles were being worked out simultaneously across the globe. In 1834, American inventor Jacob Perkins, working in London, was granted the first patent for a vapor compression refrigeration system using ether. In 1851, Dr. John Gorey of Florida, whom we have already met, was granted a U.S. patent for his machine to make ice, intended to cool sick rooms. While his commercial venture failed, his proof of concept was vital. In 1856, Australian James Harrison, a Scottish journalist turned engineer, built the first practical ether refrigerator and a commercial ice-making machine, which he used to brew ice-cold beer. In 1859, Ferdinand Carré of France introduced a refrigerator using a different refrigerant, ammonia and water. The ammonia system was more efficient and would become the dominant technology for industrial refrigeration for decades. These early machines were monstrous, dangerous, and expensive. They were used in breweries, meatpacking plants, and for industrial ice production, but they were far from a household item. The breakthrough for the home came with the development of smaller, safer units. The Domler, the first electric home refrigerator, was invented in 1913 in Chicago. It was followed by the Guardian Frigidaire Company, which was soon bought out and renamed Frigidaire. These early electric models were still luxury items. The turning point was the development of synthetic, safer refrigerants. In 1928, Thomas Midgley Jr. invented Freon, a chlorofluorocarbon CFC that was non-toxic and non-flammable, unlike ammonia, sulfur dioxide, or methyl chloride, which were hazardous and had caused several fatal accidents. The widespread adoption of Freon-based, self-contained electric refrigerators in the 1930s and 1940s marked the end of the pre-electric era. The Iceman, with his horse-drawn wagon and his signature call, faded into memory. The daily chore of emptying the drip pan from the icebox vanished. The art of packing the zier pot or digging the storage pit became a rural memory, then a forgotten skill. The steady, silent cold of the electric refrigerator, a technology born from centuries of cumulative human ingenuity, made the act of cooling a liquid as simple as opening a door. It severed, for much of the world, the immediate and tangible connection between our comfort and the natural cycles of the earth, completing a journey that began when a curious human first noticed the chill of a stone in the shade and wondered if it could be put to use. The democratization of cold through the electric refrigerator was arguably one of the most transformative domestic revolutions in human history. It did more than just chill drinks, it fundamentally reshaped diets, economies, and daily routines. However, the story of pre-electric cooling is not merely a linear progression toward a more efficient machine. It is also a story of paths not taken, of regional variations that persisted for centuries, and of the social and cultural rituals that grew up around these ancient technologies, rituals that were irrevocably altered when the humming white box entered the kitchen. Consider the social role of the village well or the communal spring. In countless communities across Europe, Asia, and Africa, the journey to fetch water was a daily, often social task primarily undertaken by women. The well was not just a source of water, it was a nexus of information, a place of gossip, and a social thermometer. The coolness of the water drawn from its depths was a shared experience, a small, collective victory over the day's heat. The temperature of the water was a topic of conversation. Deeper wells yielded cooler water. A recent rain might have warmed the shallow aquifer. This daily interaction with a naturally cool resource created a communal awareness of the environment's subtleties that is largely lost today. Similarly, the botillo in Spain or the garra in India was not merely an appliance. It was a cultural object, its shape and decoration often specific to a region, even a village. The act of placing it in the optimal spot on a stone windowsill in the path of the afternoon breeze or hung from a tree branch in a courtyard was a small, practiced domestic science passed from mother to daughter. The sound of water gently sloshing inside a cool botillo, the feel of the damp, porous clay against the lips. These were multisensory experiences intrinsically linked to the act of drinking. The electric refrigerator offered unparalleled convenience, but it also sterilized this experience, replacing the tactile, earthen cool of the clay with the anonymous metallic chill of a glass bottle. The ice trade itself, for all its global reach, created its own unique social microcosms. The Iceman was a pivotal figure in urban life. His daily arrival was an event, especially for children who would flock to his wagon for slivers of ice. His strength was legendary, his tools, the ice tongs and pick, objects of fascination. The relationship with the Iceman was personal. He knew his customers' schedules and needs. The card placed in the window, with its numbers indicating how many pounds of ice were needed that day, was a simple yet effective communication system that structured a part of the daily routine. The melting of the ice block in the icebox was a tangible, audible clock, a reminder of time's passage and the inevitability of decay, a rhythm now silenced by the thermostat's steady click. Furthermore, the pre-electric era fostered a different relationship with consumption. Because cooling was not instantaneous or limitless, it required planning and anticipation. Brewing beer, fermenting wine, or preparing a large quantity of fruit cordial was an event timed with the seasons and the weather. One had to think ahead to ensure a cool drink for a future celebration. This imposed a rhythm of delayed gratification and seasonal appreciation. The first taste of cool cider from the autumn pressing, stored in the cellar all winter, was a reward tied to the cycle of the year. The ability to have any drink from any season instantly cold at any time, while a magnificent convenience, has arguably diminished the specialness, the event-like quality that once surrounded the chilled beverage. The transition to mechanical cooling was also not without its resistance and nostalgia. Early refrigerators were expensive and loud. Many were skeptical of the manufactured air and believed it could impart a strange taste to food and drink. Advertisements from the 1920s and 1930s often had to aggressively market the very concept of electric refrigeration, assuring housewives of its safety and superiority over the trusted icebox. There were holdouts, particularly in rural areas, where the root cellar and the springhouse continued to function perfectly well for decades after urban areas had converted. The environmental impact of this journey has come full circle. The story that began with the utterly sustainable practices of using earth and evaporation culminated in the 20th century with the widespread use of CFCs like Freon, which were hailed for their safety, but later discovered to be catastrophically damaging to the planet's ozone layer. The Montreal Protocol of 1987, which phased out these substances, forced another revolution in refrigeration technology, a return to more complex but less harmful natural cycles and chemicals. In a way, we are now witnessing a re-engagement with the principles our ancestors understood instinctively, that cooling must work in harmony with, not in domination over, natural systems. In conclusion, the history of cooling liquids before electricity is far more than a catalog of obsolete tools. It is a rich narrative of human adaptation, a demonstration of how culture and technology are inextricably linked. The storage pit, the yakshal, the botijo, the icebox, these were not just devices for lowering temperature. They were embedded in the social fabric, dictating the rhythms of daily life, shaping cultural practices, and defining the sensory experience of refreshment. The hum of the modern refrigerator may have drowned out the drip of the icebox melt pan and the whisper of evaporating water from a clay pot, but the memory of those sounds and the world they represented remains a vital part of our shared heritage. It is a story that reminds us that comfort is not merely a product of technology, but a complex artifact of culture, environment, and the endless human ingenuity applied to the simple, profound desire for a cool drink on a hot day.